The camera slowly sweeps across the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room. Every seat is filled. The air feels heavy, almost suffocating, as if everyone inside knows they're about to witness something that will change everything. Overhead, harsh white lights wash the room in a cold, unforgiving glow. Every bead of sweat, every nervous twitch, every flicker of emotion is exposed for the cameras. Click, click, click. Dozens of cameras fire in rapid succession, their flashes illuminating the crowded gallery, where reporters, aides, and curious spectators are packed shoulder to shoulder. Everyone's here for the same reason: something big is about to happen. And then the heavy oak doors at the far end of the chamber creak open. Senator Rick Scott steps into the room. His presence is calculated. Every detail, from his custom gray suit to the polished black shoes, screams authority. He walks slowly, deliberately, like a man who believes the world moves around him, not the other way around. As he approaches his seat, Scott adjusts his expensive cufflinks with the kind of subtle arrogance only power and wealth can buy. This isn't just a politician walking into a committee hearing. This is a man who has spent decades perfecting the art of control. But today he isn't here to listen. He's here to dominate, to intimidate, to silence anyone who dares challenge him. Across the long committee table, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sits quietly. At just 33 years old, she seems impossibly outmatched on paper, a first-term congresswoman from Texas facing down a seasoned political heavyweight. But there's something in her eyes. Her gaze follows Rick Scott steadily as he takes his seat. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't blink. It's the kind of calm that comes from knowing something no one else in the room knows. In her hands, she holds a thin leather folder. Ordinary at first glance, unremarkable. But inside that folder lies weeks of preparation, research, facts, receipts. Every page is a weapon carefully sharpened for this very moment. The murmur of the gallery fades as Scott settles in. You can almost hear hearts beating, breaths held. And then it happens, a fleeting moment that only lasts a second but feels eternal. Their eyes lock. Rick Scott, towering, wealthy, powerful, backed by decades of institutional muscle. Jasmine Crockett, young, underestimated, carrying the weight of working families, civil rights battles, and every underdog who has ever been told to stay in their place. The energy shifts. You feel it. Everyone feels it. Today isn't just another hearing. Today the old guard faces the new generation, and only one of them will leave this room with their power intact. The committee room feels like a battlefield before the first shot is fired. Two figures, two worlds, two very different kinds of power. Senator Rick Scott has built his entire persona on authority and intimidation. At 61 years old, he carries himself like a man who has spent decades bending systems to his will. His RSM is impressive on paper: former governor of Florida, now U.S. Senator, and a personal fortune of over $200 million. But beneath the polished exterior lies a reputation that precedes him. Known for his condescending tone, especially toward women of color. Famous for his old-school hardball politics, where wealth and influence speak louder than facts. Feared in hearings for his habit of interrupting, talking down, and making opponents feel small. Rick Scott doesn't debate. Rick Scott dominates. Or at least, he thinks he does. Across from him sits Jasmine Crockett, and everything about her defies his expectations. Just 33 years old, she's part of the new generation of lawmakers, diverse, fearless, and unwilling to accept the way things have always been. Her journey couldn't be more different. Born into a working-class family in Texas, raised by a single mother juggling multiple jobs. Fought her way through college and law school, graduating with student debt and without privilege. Spent years as a civil rights attorney, standing up for working families, victims of discrimination, and those silenced by powerful institutions. Unlike Scott, Crockett has earned every inch of ground she stands on. She doesn't carry the weight of old money or generational power. She carries something stronger: resilience. And it shows. For the press, it looks like a mismatch. A seasoned, wealthy senator versus a freshman congresswoman, barely in her first term. Everyone assumes this will be another one of Scott's viral takedowns, another clip of him lecturing a naive newcomer to rack up views on conservative media. But there's something about Jasmine Crockett's steady gaze, something about the folder resting lightly in her hands that hints at a very different outcome. The cameras zoom in on her face. No fear, no hesitation, just quiet confidence. And suddenly the question shifts. Is Rick Scott walking into a victory or a trap? The committee room feels charged as though the walls themselves can sense what's coming. Somewhere deep down, everyone knows this isn't just a debate about economic policy. This is a clash between two eras of American politics: old power versus new voices, privilege versus preparation, control versus courage. Who will win today, the man who's used to talking over everyone, or the woman who spent her life fighting to be heard before this hearing even began? Rick Scott had already earned his reputation, and for some his notoriety. At 61 years old, Scott is no stranger to power. His rise to political prominence has been relentless, calculated, and unapologetic. Former governor of Florida for 8 years, now a United States senator. A man with a personal fortune exceeding $200 million. On the surface, his story reads like the classic American success tale, a self-made businessman who built an empire in healthcare before entering politics. But peel back the polished veneer and the picture gets messier, darker. Rick Scott's legacy will forever carry the weight of one number: $1.27 billion. That's the amount Columbia HCA Healthcare, the company Scott co-founded and led, was forced to pay in what remains the largest Medicare fraud settlement in U.S. history. Under his leadership, investigators discovered a massive scheme involving inflated billing, false claims, and defrauding federal health programs. Scott walked away without facing personal charges, but the damage was done. For millions of Americans, especially working families and seniors, his name became synonymous with profiting off the sick and vulnerable. As Florida's Governor, Rick Scott promised efficiency and prosperity. But critics say his policies painted a different picture: tax breaks for billionaires and big corporations, cuts to education, healthcare, and social services that working-class families relied on, pushing restrictive voting laws that made it harder for low-income and minority communities to cast their ballots. In Scott's Florida, the wealthy got richer while ordinary people were left behind. What makes Rick Scott formidable isn't just his or some, it's his presence. He commands a room the way a CEO commands a boardroom: confident, polished, and at times intimidating. But for those who've stood across from him, another side emerges. A man who talks down to his opponents, especially younger, less experienced lawmakers. A man who wields his wealth, influence, and seniority like weapons. In his world, money buys power, and power keeps you untouchable. At least that's what Rick Scott believes. While Rick Scott was born into privilege, Jasmine Crockett's story began somewhere very different, in the quiet, sun-baked streets of Dallas, Texas. Jasmine grew up in a working-class family where every dollar mattered. Her mother, a single parent, juggled 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. There were no silver spoons, no trust funds, no private tutors. There was only hard work and hope. Jasmine learned early what struggle looked like: unpaid bills stacking on the kitchen counter, nights when dinner meant cereal and tap water, watching her mother sacrifice everything so her children could dream bigger than their circumstances. Those sacrifices carved something into Jasmine's heart: a relentless fire to fight for fairness, not just for herself, but for everyone like her. Jasmine wasn't handed opportunities, she fought for them. She worked multiple jobs to pay for college, then law school, often studying until dawn blurred into morning. Her dream wasn't to become rich or powerful. Her dream was to make a difference. And so she became a civil rights attorney, a voice for those silenced by power, victims of racial discrimination, denied jobs or housing. Families shattered by police brutality, seeking justice they thought they'd never find. Communities ignored by the very systems meant to protect them. Every courtroom became her battleground. Every client's story a piece of her own. For years, Jasmine stood toe-to-toe with police departments, corporations, and local governments. Every time she was told to stay quiet, she spoke louder. Every time she was told this is too big for you, she fought harder. By the time Jasmine Crockett entered Congress, she carried more than a resume. She carried the stories of thousands of people who had been dismissed, ignored, or oppressed. She carried their pain, their struggles, and their hopes. She knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew what it felt like to have power used against you. And she walked into Washington determined to make sure no one else would feel that way again. Jasmine Crockett isn't just another politician. She is a fighter born from the shadows, shaped by hardship, sharpened by injustice, and driven by a singular purpose: to stand where others can't, to speak when others are silenced, to fight for justice even when the odds are stacked against her. And today, sitting across from Rick Scott, she is ready. The tension in the committee room isn't just about policy. It's bigger than politics. It's a clash between two worlds and two visions for America. Senator Rick Scott embodies the old guard, a world where money buys power and power makes the rules. To Scott, politics has always been a game of influence traded in back rooms, wealth used as leverage, seniority as a weapon to silence dissenting voices. He thrives on institutional authority, the unspoken rules that say the rich, the powerful, the connected get to decide how the country runs. In Scott's world, power isn't earned. Power is inherited, bought, and guarded fiercely. And today he believes that power is his to wield unchallenged. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett represents everything the old world fears. She is the new generation of leaders, grounded in lived experience, not privilege, driven by justice, not political gamesmanship, determined to give working families and marginalized voices a seat at the table. For Crockett, politics isn't about status, it's about service. Her authority doesn't come from wealth or seniority. It comes from knowing the pain of her constituents because she lived it herself. Every bill she fights for, every hearing she attends, carries the weight of real people's struggles. The single mother working 3 jobs who still can't afford insulin. The veteran denied housing benefits after serving his country. The community silenced and overlooked by systems built for the elite. In Crockett's world, power doesn't belong to the privileged few. It belongs to the people. This isn't just 2 politicians debating economic policy. This is 2 ideologies on a collision course. Rick Scott, the embodiment of wealth influence and the old rules. Jasmine Crockett, the rising voice of justice, equality, and the new generation. The clash feels inevitable. One represents the America that has always been the other, the America that is fighting to emerge. And as cameras zoom in and microphones sharpen, the unspoken question electrifies the air: will today belong to power or to justice? The tension in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was already thick enough to cut with a knife. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of attention, confidently presenting her arguments, her voice steady but passionate, weaving through facts and lived experiences of racial injustice and systemic inequality. And then, without warning, Rick Scott leaned forward, his lips curling into a cold, condescending smile. "Maybe we should let the adults handle the complex questions," he said slowly, his deep voice echoing through the marble chamber. The words hung in the air like a grenade. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. You could hear the faint clicks of cameras stopping, mid-shot reporters, pens freezing above their notebooks. Everyone in the room understood exactly what Scott was implying. This wasn't just about policy. This wasn't just about the debate. This was an attack on Jasmine Crockett herself, on her youth, her gender, and her race. To him, she wasn't experienced enough. To him, she wasn't mature enough to grasp the real issues. To him, she didn't belong in this room, not at his level. A low murmur rippled across the committee members. Some faces registered shock, others tried to hide their satisfaction. Reporters' fingers started moving again, typing furiously. They knew this was going to be a headline. Jasmine froze for just a fraction of a second, just enough for the cameras to catch her sharp inhale. But behind her stillness, a storm was building. The moment Rick Scott's words left his mouth, the entire room transformed. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every flicker of emotion. The air felt heavy charged, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. The camera first panned to the Democrats, faces hardened, jaws clenched. One senator leaned forward, and hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind them, aides exchanged urgent glances. They knew this wasn't just another policy debate anymore. It was a battle of values. Then the lens shifted to the Republicans. The atmosphere there was conflicted. Some looked smug, hiding small, satisfied smiles. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, knowing Scott's jab had crossed a dangerous line. A few avoided eye contact entirely, as though distancing themselves from the fallout they sensed was coming. Finally, the cameras swung toward the press gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, keyboards clacking softly. The room buzzed with silent anticipation. They weren't just watching a hearing, they were witnessing history unfolding in real time. Every eyebrow raised, every whisper carried weight. Every lens was fixed on Jasmine Crockett. Somewhere in the silence, you could almost hear America listening. The silence was deafening. Rick Scott leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk curling at the edges of his lips, as though he had just claimed victory with a single sentence. Around him, the air vibrated with a strange energy, part triumph, part dread. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Her posture didn't shift. Her hands remained calmly folded on the desk, but her eyes told a different story. There was a sharp glint there, a flash of something electric, anger, yes, but also control. A storm was forming, but it wasn't chaos, it was calculated. Then almost imperceptibly, the corner of her lips curved upward. Not a smile, not mockery. Something far more dangerous, certainty. The cameras zoomed in, hungry for the slightest movement. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Even the background murmurs faded until the only thing audible was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. In the gallery, spectators leaned forward unconsciously. Hearts pounded, hands clutched chair arms. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. Jasmine Crockett was about to strike back. The room froze. Jasmine Crockett's fingers brushed the edge of a thick black folder resting quietly on the desk. Embossed in bold silver letters across the cover, accountability folder. The cameras immediately zoomed in. Reporters leaned so close to their screens, you could almost hear their collective breath hitch. Something was about to happen, and everyone knew it. With deliberate slowness, she opened the folder. Flip. The first page turned, its crisp sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silent chamber. Flip. Another page. This time, Rick Scott shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smirk beginning to fade. The air was charged thick with anticipation. Every gesture, every pause felt calculated, like a master chess player waiting to deliver checkmate. Then she paused, her finger resting lightly on a particular document. Without looking up, she exhaled softly, almost as if steadying herself before a strike. The tension was unbearable. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Everyone understood one thing. This wasn't just a folder. It was a loaded weapon, and Jasmine Crockett was about to pull the trigger. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Calmly, deliberately, she slid a single page from the accountability folder, holding it between two fingers, like it was evidence in a murder trial. Her gaze locked onto Rick Scott, unwavering, sharp as a blade. Senator Scott. She began, her tone icy but steady. When you talk about your real-world experience, are you referring to the $1.7 billion Medicare fraud your company committed? Boom. It wasn't a shout. It didn't have to be. The words detonated in the room like a controlled explosion. The cameras instantly zoomed in on Rick Scott's face. For the first time in the entire hearing, the man who had interrupted, mocked, and belittled his opponents sat frozen. His jaw twitched. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, pale, almost ghost-like. Across the room, murmurs rippled like a wave. Reporters whispered furiously, typing with lightning speed. Phones were raised, tweets were flying. One camera operator mouthed silently to another, "This is it. This is the clip. This is going viral." The hearing room moments ago, under Scott's control, now belonged entirely to Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine didn't stop at the first strike. She'd only opened the door. Now she was walking Rick Scott straight into the storm, one fact at a time. She flipped another page from the accountability folder. Every movement deliberate, every word a calculated incision. Under your leadership, Senator Scott, Florida's education system dropped to 46th place nationally. That's not leadership, that's a free fall. Rick Scott shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening. But Jasmine wasn't finished. During your tenure, the median household income in Florida barely moved an inch. Yet your personal net worth magically soared by $40 million. Is that what you mean by real-world experience? Senator gasps erupted from one side of the room. Even a few Republican aides exchanged glances. Eyebrows raised. Every sentence from Jasmine landed like a clean surgical cut, slicing deeper into the carefully crafted image Scott had built. Then came the final twist of the knife. And Senator, before you accuse anyone else of grandstanding, let's talk about your social media habits. You've posted 847 tweets about this issue compared to 312 from me. That's almost triple the noise, Senator. So who's really grandstanding here? Reporters exploded. The clicking of cameras sounded like rainfall. The room buzzed like a live wire. Rick Scott stared down at his notes, pretending to flip pages he wasn't reading. For the first time, he looked small, dwarfed by the storm he tried to provoke. The room had already been simmering, but Jasmine Crockett's next words detonated like a grenade. She leaned forward, resting both hands on the desk. Her voice was steady, but there was thunder in her tone, the kind of power that stops cameras mid-pan and freezes even the boldest senators in place. You came here today thinking you could humiliate a young black woman. The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable slicing through the silence. Rick Scott blinked, once, twice. The camera zoomed in, catching every twitch of his jaw, every bead of sweat forming under the harsh committee lights. But Jasmine wasn't done. She paused deliberately, letting the weight of her first sentence sink into the bones of everyone watching. Then, with a voice calm enough to be terrifying, she struck again. But unlike you, I came here to work, and I've done more in one term than you have in your entire career. Boom. Gasps rippled through the chamber. One aide stifled a cough, another dropped a pen. Even the photographers lowered their cameras for half a second just to process what they'd heard. Within seconds, Twitter knew the entire country was on fire. Clips of Jasmine's words were being cut, looped, captioned, and broadcasted across every platform. She said what we've all been thinking. History is happening in real time. Jasmine Crockett just ended Rick Scott's career in less than 30 seconds. For the first time all morning, Rick Scott looked small. He sat back, blinking rapidly, suddenly a man out of place, a relic from an old order facing a new America that wasn't going to bow anymore. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She simply closed the accountability folder as if to say, we're done here. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The kind of silence so deep it felt like the entire chamber had stopped breathing. Then it hit. The first sound was a single clap. Sharp, certain, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire Democratic side erupted. Senators' aides, even interns, standing to their feet applauding like they just witnessed the birth of a new political era. Jasmine Crockett didn't even look up. She didn't need to. The roar behind her said everything. Across the aisle, however, the Republican benches were frozen. Not a word, not a whisper, not even the nervous shuffling of papers. It was as if someone had pressed mute on half the chamber. Rick Scott sat motionless, his face drained of color. The once confident former governor, the man who'd built an empire of power and wealth, now looked like a cornered animal under the glare of the cameras. His right hand trembled slightly as it rested on the table. His knuckles, white jaw, clenched lips pressed into a thin, brittle line. He avoided the cameras. He avoided Jasmine's gaze. Because at that moment, everyone in the room, friend and foe alike, knew the balance had shifted. The senator who came here expecting to humiliate had just been obliterated instead. In the cameras, they caught it all. Live, unfiltered, unforgettable. Within minutes, the clip exploded. By the end of the first hour, it had racked up 2 million views across platforms. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Hashtag Crockett Clapback shot straight to #1 trending worldwide on Twitter. Memes flooded in within minutes. Jasmine's calm, sharp gaze became the face of defiance. Screenshots of Rick Scott's pale, trembling expression circulated like wildfire, accompanied by captions like, "When you thought you had the upper hand but forgot she brought receipts." Jasmine 1. Rick Scott 0. Late-night hosts pounced on it. Cable news channels looped the 47-second clip nonstop. CNN called it a generational political moment. Fox News, though reluctant, couldn't ignore the virality. They aired it 5 times in a single segment, struggling to spin it. Reddit threads exploded with play-by-play breakdowns. TikTok stitched the clip with reaction videos, each more creative than the last. By the third hour, the clip crossed 10 million views. By sunset, it had reached 42 countries and was translated into 17 languages. Journalists called it the slap heard around Washington, except no one raised a hand. It was words alone that changed everything. Overnight, Jasmine Crockett became a household name. Within 2 weeks, her social media exploded, plus 750,000 new followers on Instagram. Her TikTok gained 1.2 million likes in just 5 days. Twitter, now X, turned her into a political icon. Every post went viral within minutes. Talk shows fought for her presence. The Late Show, The Daily Show, and The View lined up invites. Trevor Noah joked, "Forget clapbacks, Jasmine just wrote the manual." Corporate sponsors came knocking. Major brands, from legal advocacy groups to diversity-driven organizations, offered lucrative partnerships. Jasmine didn't take all of them, but the ones she chose aligned with her values: justice, equity, and representation. Her political capital skyrocketed. Pundits started calling her the rising star of the Democratic Party. Strategists whispered about her future leadership roles. She could be the next AOC, or maybe even more. In Washington, insiders noted an immediate shift. Committees wanted her voice. Lobbyists feared her receipts. Voters saw her as a fighter who stood her ground when it mattered most. What began as a 47-second clapback had now become a national political awakening, and Jasmine Crockett was at its center. For Rick Scott, the fall came fast, and it was brutal. What began as a confident attempt to humiliate Jasmine Crockett turned into the worst political week of his career. Inside, the Republican Party whispers became shouts. Why would he walk into a trap like that? How do you lose control of the room to a freshman congresswoman? Even his closest allies couldn't defend him. By the next morning, Fox News panels debated if Rick Scott's career had just flatlined. Donors panicked. Within 72 hours, two of his biggest backers, a Florida real estate tycoon and a healthcare lobby group, quietly pulled funding. Others froze contributions, unwilling to risk being tied to what one GOP strategist called a political sinking ship. Scott's approval ratings plummeted. In Florida, a fresh poll showed 63% of Republicans thought his performance was weak. Among independents, 72% said they lost confidence in his leadership. Behind closed doors, party leaders stopped returning his calls. Strategists began discussing whether he should step aside for the next Senate leadership race. In less than a week, Rick Scott went from being a power broker to a political liability, and all it took was 47 seconds of Jasmine Crockett turning his own narrative against him. This was no longer just a personal clash, it was a seismic shift. What happened in that hearing room was bigger than Rick Scott. It was bigger than Jasmine Crockett, too. This was the moment a new generation of leadership announced itself on the national stage. For decades, American politics has been shaped by the same establishment. Figures people who assumed their power was untouchable. But Jasmine's 47-second rebuttal became the line in the sand. Her words echoed far beyond the chamber walls. Power can no longer protect injustice, and respect is not inherited, it's earned. Young voters heard her. Communities long ignored by policymakers heard her. Even within Congress, staffers whispered about the Crockett effect, a shift where fresh voices refused to be intimidated by old power structures. This was not just a victory, it was a warning to anyone clinging to the past. A new generation has arrived. And they're not asking for permission. When the hearing was over, the political headlines focused on Rick Scott's humiliation. But for millions of Americans, especially women of color, this moment meant something far deeper. For Black women across the country, Jasmine's stand was validation. Your voice matters, your experience matters, and your truth cannot be erased no matter how loud they try to silence you. Social media exploded with videos of young women crying while sharing what Jasmine's words meant to them. Mothers wrote, "I showed this to my daughter. I want her to know her voice is powerful." It was no longer just about politics. It became a cultural moment, a declaration that marginalized voices can command national attention when armed with preparation, courage, and truth. For the broader public, Jasmine's cross-examination carried a timeless lesson. Preparation is power. She walked in ready with facts no one could refute. Truth is unshakable. No matter how powerful her opponent, the evidence spoke louder. Justice demands courage. It doesn't come from the system, it comes from people brave enough to challenge it. In the days that followed, op-eds across major outlets called it a masterclass in dignity, intellect, and purpose. And perhaps most importantly, millions felt seen and reminded that sometimes one voice can move an entire nation. The cameras were still rolling. The nation was still watching. And Jasmine's final words didn't just belong to that hearing room, they belonged to every viewer at home. Her voice steadied, direct, carrying the weight of both defiance and hope. If you believe justice matters, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because this fight isn't over. It wasn't just a call to engage. It was a rallying cry, a reminder that justice isn't handed down from marble halls in Washington. It's carried forward by the people who refuse to stay silent. Every click, every share, every voice raised in the comments section was no longer just online noise. It became part of a bigger movement. This was more than a viral moment. It was an invitation: join the fight. Stand for truth, be part of history. The story of Jasmine Crockett versus Rick Scott isn't just about politics, it's about life itself. The lesson is clear: preparation is power. Don't just show up ready. Jasmine's strength came not from shouting louder, but from doing the work that her opponent never expected. Truth is unstoppable. Lies, intimidation, and arrogance can stand tall for a while, but when truth is armed with courage, it always cuts through. Never underestimate your own voice. Whether you're young, overlooked, or told you don't belong, remember your story, your experience, and your fight for justice matter. In our own lives, we all face Rick Scotts, people who dismiss us, underestimate us, or try to silence us. The lesson is, don't shrink back. Prepare, stand firm, and let your truth speak louder than their power. If you believe voices like Jasmine's deserve to be heard, if you believe justice and truth matter, then join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories that the mainstream won't show you. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. Your voice matters here.